All right, everyone, we're going to talk about this map. This caught my attention, and I really wanted to make a video about this for a long time. This is a map from a book called the Annali de Geographia Statistica, something like that. And the author is a Jacob Graberg. I think that's how you pronounce it. I'll explain that in a second. But this map was published in 1801. Well, actually 1802, but the map was made in 1801, apparently by the cartographer Jacob Graberg. What is amazing about this map is that it has, lots of names you might remember: Hunter, Furneaux, Banks, or Bass Strait, that sort of thing. But at the top, you see Ulamaroa, New Holland. So it's got two naming conventions, and New South Wales. But close up, it has Port Western, where there's Port Phillip, and most importantly, which is part of this video, Porto de Dalrymple. Yes, now that's really caught my attention, because now I think that we've caught them in the act and we've got the facts. So that's what it's about. All right, so it's a bit of background. In maps, let's just go for that. All right, this is from Vivid Maps. We've obviously seen lots of maps, historical maps, but Vivid Maps has a good chronology. Just to give you a rough idea, this is from you could call it a Portuguese map. It could be Moorish, I'm not sure. It seems to be quite incorrect, and it's probably a propaganda piece, not sure. We get a bit more serious maps, Dutch maps and that sort of thing, and we obviously don't get the whole picture. There's French, it goes on and on. Then we get down to this. This is James Cook's map. Apparently he did it in 1770 or 1769. I just want to point out that that the names like Port Jackson and Port Stephens, the reason why James Cook puts the names on there is that they already are ports. They're already operating as ports. He doesn't name them a port. If they were not a port when he got there, he would have just called it Stevens Bay or something, but he'd called it Port Stephens and Port Jackson because they're already functioning ports. It's just as simple as that. All right, so then there's this other map comes on by another cartographer, and he decides to use the naming convention Ulamaroa. That's the predecessor to Jacob Graberg, and his name is Daniel Djurberg, and he's a Swedish cartographer. He had a famous grandfather. But he has a pretty conventional life. There's nothing particularly mysterious other than he made quirky names for maps. He was known for this, and so he decided to call Australia Ulamaroa. However, it was referenced as Ulamaroa as a couple other by other sources, which I'll talk about in a minute. Okay, so after that map, we have other maps. There's Nouvelle Hollande, the French maps, there's so on and so on. And in 1802, we have this other map that is finally got Tasmania separated from the mainland, but we still have missing place names. So I think that's a bit strange. That there's always missing around between Adelaide and Port Phillip. Common Notatia, another thing. So anyway, so that's a standard of map around 1802, apparently. So that's what we get. But just wanted to draw your attention to some of the works that was typical of the 1802 period by Bowden's voyage, and also there's Flinders' voyage and Bowden's voyage. But Bowden was a French captain. He did a scientific expedition in South Australia. He did maps of this standard around South Australia. So he put a huge amount of detail into it. So they knew how to make really good maps back then. There's no problem about that. So let's not get missiled into it. Now let's go back to that map that I showed you again to compare it. What we have here is we have a very detailed map with a fairly accurate coastline for 1801. We also have the name Ulamaroa, and we have Port Western, and we have Port Dalrymple down here where Launceston is today. Okay, the significance of that is this. The timeline of Launceston, Matthew Flinders and George Bass, they sheltered in the what's now the Tamara River, north of Launceston. They called it Dalrymple. Apparently they named it after another officer, a botanist or someone in the British Navy. I'm not sure if that's exactly true. And then in 1802, there was a French expedition and all that. And then 1804, an expedition to settle the area was formed in New South Wales under Lieutenant Colonel William Patterson. He arrived on the Buffalo on 4th of November and set up a camp near Georgetown. Wasn't considered suitable, and so him and convicts and soldiers apparently moved in to establish the settlement called Yorktown. And Yorktown became Port Dalrymple, and then as time went on, we ended up having Launceston. What I think happened is that there was already a settlement there called, at Port Dalrymple, and they invaded it in 1804, and that's my take on that. And I don't think that the name Dalrymple comes from the botanist. Now, if you go to Dalrymple as a name, it's Gaelic. It's from West Scotland. This is a common theme I keep coming up with: is the West is the traditional Gaelic, or the indigenous Gaelic, not the Scots, but the indigenous Gaelic with a different language, different Celtic language. And the name Dalrymple is Gaelic for flat field of the crooked pool or river, which is consistent with the River Tamar. It's crooked, and at the end, of course, is farming area. So it's a very good description. It's probably called Dalrymple because similar climate and a similar topography, and that's why it's named Dalrymple, because that's what it was, and that's it. So that seems to be the easiest solution. Also, the map, as I keep reiterating, is from 1801. And it clearly has Port Dalrymple. It's called Port Dalrymple not because it's going to be a port and Flinders decided it's going to be one. It's because it was one, and obviously it was one at the time, and that obviously predates 1804 where the settlement arrived. So that's pretty much proof positive that it was a port prior by at least 2 or 3 years, and I would say a lot more than that, because you have Port Western, which becomes, of course, Port Phillip, and that obviously predates the settlement, the recorded settlement, which was a failed settlement in 1803 by the British. So to me, and because there's a port there and there's a port down there, that implies trade and whaling and some agriculture, obviously. And you'd have to have quite a substantial population, probably at least a few hundred people minimum, to justify that. I'd say a few thousand that was already there from Western Europe. And so in 1804 and around in 1808 and the Rum Rebellion and all those other, around the time of 1803 to 1808, 1810, you would have had the wiping out of the Gaelic settlements and of course the Australian Indigenous Aboriginal population. So these tragedies were happening. Going back to Ulamaroa, the name itself, I just wanted to cover off on the quirky name on that, but it's not quirky. It was apparently recorded by Cook, who was in Doubtless Bay in New Zealand, where a party of Maoris had told him of a large country lying to the northwest, a month's journey away. Some of the Maoris' ancestors had sailed there, returning with depleted numbers. The inhabitants were said to live on pork. Pork is interesting because obviously Australia has no native pigs, but we do have the feral pig. The feral pig seen here is a pest in Australia. It's in large numbers, and it's apparently, like all these stories, in the first ships turned up and had domesticated pigs. Some of the pigs escaped, and then they suddenly reverted back to being wild boar in no time at all, or feral pig, you could call it. It's possible, but it's also just as likely that in the 1700s, prior to the British, or the 1600s even, but the 1700s or even earlier, Western Europe people who escaped the debacle of Western Europe at the time just said, let's go, stuff it, we'll just go and live in somewhere that no one's going to find us, and just took their pigs with them. And therefore they would have lived on pig. And the Maori stories, it makes sense. It's consistent with the story of the cows. Apparently, the first fleet, or 1795, 1788, 2 bulls and 5 cows left the first fleet, just wandered around and somehow turned into 10,000 cows or something out in Picton on the other side of the Greater Sydney area, which is a feat in itself, and bred at such a rate that any modern day farmer would be envious of their breeding rate from 5, hardly any females or something, 2 bulls, 5 cows turned into, I mean, that's an amazing, I mean, that is amazing. That's an achievement. I mean, no, I don't know any bovine population that could achieve that without being in an ideal setting. But anyway, there you go. And these cows were from South Africa as well. This is something that the Dutch would normally have probably chosen if they were going to settle in Eastern Australia, which they probably did before the British, and that's just how it is. And it's just a shame that we don't get any factual information on that. So thanks very much. I think that I've covered everything. Actually, no, I wanted to discuss the author of that map. He wrote the person that published the map was Jacob Graberg. He wrote the book Annali di Geographie e di Statistica, and this book is it has a lot of bits and pieces. There's no English translation. With regards to Australia, it has certain features about different parts of the world, but for Australia, it only includes Bass Strait. The guy himself has a bit of an interesting story. Born in 1776 and died in 1847, served as a Swedish consul in Genoa. Genoa always comes up in these sort of videos. We say, oh, these Genoese bankers and Genoese merchants and what they did, and Genoa's always on the discussion. Italian nobility, and came from Gotland, where the Goths come from. Erudite man, was a member of 68 academies and learned societies. So he was up there socially, and based on the quality of the map he's produced, I'd say that he would have had access to other maps more detailed than what we've ever seen in any of the museums. I think that some of the maps that were made of Australia have just been hidden, and he basically accessed it. So he already had prior knowledge, and the maps that we get are just inferior. And I think that that's the simple story. Therefore, in certain archives, there would be maps of Australia that's been concealed from us because he would have had access to better maps, and we don't get them. It's clear to me. It's as obvious as that, because I can't make sense of it any other way. And look, maybe those maps were were only out by 10 years, and maybe. But still, it's still the story we got is wrong, and I think that what I've shown you proves it's not just an argument. I think I've proven that Dalrymple was settled before the British, and there was better cartography and better knowledge of the area. So thanks for watching. Please provide comments. If anyone's interested in trying to understand more about the history, probably in the research Flinders notes. Flinders did do a lot of notes, whereas Bowden didn't do very many notes, and that's interesting when we start talking about South Australian fake history or altered history. But Flinders does make a lot of notes, but then you'd have to analyse it deeply to see what he's not saying, or because obviously writing notes takes time and penmanship and all that takes a while. But it's probably worth doing a forensic analysis of Flinders' work to see what is not being said. And so that might be something for someone else to do. Anyway, thanks very much.